Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today in this virtual and global pavilion at COP29. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the launch of a pivotal policy brief that marks a significant step in the fight against climate change, the case for action on tropospheric ozone. My name is Rodolfo Lassi, and I have the honor of serving as the moderator for this event. I'm also proud to collaborate with the Cleaner Institute in the critical effort to address short-lived climate forces, the potent pollutants like ozone that pose a severe threat to public health, the climate, and ecosystems. Together,
Severa
we aim to
amenaza en
ensure
contra de la salud
quality and
pública.
actionable
También queremos ponerle
strategies to
luz a
mitigate
las
these
acciones y
consequences
estrategias para
and drive
mitigar a estos
meaningful progress in
supercontaminantes
climate and
y
air quality
conducir
improvements.
un,
Thank you very much for
muchas
being
mejoras en la
part
lucha en
of
contra del
this
cambio climático.
essential
Muchas gracias a
dialogue.
todos por ser parte
Let
de
me
este.
take a moment to share some important housekeeping announcements. This event provides simultaneous translation into Spanish. Please follow the instructions displayed on your screens. And additionally, you will have the opportunity to engage with our distinguished specialists and policymakers by submitting your questions. We encourage you to use the Q&A function in the Zoom to submit your questions at any time during the presentation or panel discussions. Before we proceed with the presentation of the report, I would like to highlight that this virtual pavilion on tropospheric ozone was created with the support of the Cleaner Fund and the lead participation of the Cleaner Institute, the Cleaner Task Force, and Hill Consulting. I also like to note that the entire report is available for free to download, read, and explore on this virtual pavilion website. Let's begin with the introduction of Dr. Siteli Sompa, a distinguished member of the scientific team at the Cleaner Task Force. Dr. Sompa holds a PhD in atmospheric science from Colorado State University, where her research focuses on emissions from the oil and gas sector, VOCs mainly, and their impacts on tropospheric ozone and other secondary chemical species. She also had the privilege of working alongside Nobel laureate Dr. Mario Molina, contributing to groundbreaking work in atmospheric sciences. With that, I'm pleased to hand the floor to Dr. Siteli Sompa, the lead author and the coordinator of this policy brief. Siteli, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodolfo. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm gonna, please, can you confirm that you can see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so again, thank you for the kind introduction. It is truly an honor to be here today among such distinguished colleagues and partners for the launch of the Case for Action on Tropospheric Ozone. I want to extend a heart-feeling thank you to the incredible teams at the Cleaner Institute and Hill Consulting. Really, your tireless dedication alongside the unwavering support from the Cleaner Fund team has made today's briefing possible. I will also like to give special thanks to all the members of the steering committee of the Tropospheric Ozone Assessment Report and the advisory group of this project for their input and support. So let's get started. And first of all, I would like to ask you and give you a few seconds to respond the following question. What is tropospheric ozone? And you don't have to say it out loud. You don't have to put it in the chat. Just remember your answer. And I'm going to give you 15 seconds. Choose wisely. 5 more seconds. Okay, so the correct answer was C. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what is tropospheric ozone. It turns out that ozone, there are two types of it in the atmosphere, and one is the good ozone because it protects us from the UV rays of the sun and stays up in the stratosphere. And a second one that it concentrates at lower levels called the tropospheric ozone. So there are two different types of ozone in the atmosphere. One that is good, and it's because it protects us from the UV rays of the sun and stays up in the stratosphere. And a second one that concentrates at lower levels called tropospheric ozone, and it's considered bad because it contributes to warming our planet, harms human health, and threatens food security. And really, don't worry if you didn't get the answer right. Many people get confused, but I never do. I was born in Mexico City when at the time it was considered the most polluted city in the world. I live firsthand the impacts of tropospheric ozone. When I was a child, I remember those days when ozone levels were so high that we were not allowed to play outside. We had to spend our recess time inside our classrooms. So you can imagine that those memories will remain with me for my entire life. I was told the sky was blue, but all I could see was gray, a perpetual gray sky. Fortunately, and as you will read in the policy brief, things have improved since then in Mexico City, but not everywhere. Tropospheric ozone levels have greatly increased over the last decades in regions like South and Southeast Asia, and also in various parts of South America. Tropospheric ozone causes globally almost 500,000 premature deaths per year, with conservative estimates of associated costs around $500 billion per year. And it turns out that during that short time that tropospheric ozone stays in an atmosphere, which can range from hours to a few weeks in polluted areas, these ozone molecules are so good at trapping heat that it's estimated that it has contributed to 0.23 degrees Celsius to warming our planet since pre-industrial times. And together with other super pollutants, including methane, they are currently driving almost half of global warming up to date. But ozone impacts don't stop there. It also affects vegetation, causing oxidative stress that results in losses of up to a quarter of total crop yield of sensitive staple crops like rice, maize, and wheat, in which billions of people rely on. So at this point, you might be wondering, what can we do to reduce tropospheric ozone? Because ozone is not directly emitted in the atmosphere, but rather formed in it, the way to introduce tropospheric ozone to reduce tropospheric ozone levels is by reducing emissions of its precursors, which include methane, a potent greenhouse gas, nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, and carbon monoxide. And the good news is that there are strategies for shared emission sources, meaning that a single source can emit various pollutants, and some of them can be ozone precursors, but there can also be other greenhouse gases and particles. And we need to remember that all of them pollute our atmosphere. So by having a
Así que al haber un abordaje integrativo, podemos reducir los niveles de ozono troposférico
and air quality improvements that come from other pollutants. This would also help achieving net zero and decarbonization targets. In the policy brief that we are presenting today, you will find 4 examples from around the world where even though different approaches were taken to tackle tropospheric ozone, we highlight the key learnings that could help other regions when addressing the superpollutant. And just to give you a hint about those successful mitigation efforts, here are 4 that those regions relied on. First of all, a strong political will where economic, technical, and human resources are specifically allocated for this matter. Second, coordination and cooperation between multiple actors is essential. Third, a comprehensive scientific information that comes from local and continuously collected data is needed. And fourth, regional and local integrated emission inventories should include greenhouse gases and air quality pollutants together. Overall, what all these examples tell us is that tropospheric ozone can be addressed under different realities and that collaboration is key. So, now during COP29, where international leadership and ambition on climate drives action, we call for tropospheric ozone and other climate superpollutants to be mandated within UNFCCC, including embedding in COP decision texts and championing the development and uptake of the 2027 IPCC methodology report on emission inventories for short-lived climate forcers. We call for all parties to join and deliver on the global methane pledge and to include in their national determined contributions targets related to tropospheric ozone and other climate superpollutants. We call for tropospheric ozone and air quality standards to be in line with WHO guidelines and interim targets. And we call to accelerate the transition to cleaner energy sources and improve energy efficiency. And on the financing side, we would like that efforts to reduce tropospheric ozone and its precursors should be supported by donor countries, multilateral development banks, and philanthropic foundations through grants and concessional development financing so that recipient countries who are often located in the global south do not suffer from debt distress. So to end my intervention today, I hope that the next time that you think about tropospheric ozone, you remember about the superpollutant that it is and the following 4x4 things. First, it is a pollutant that can be addressed and has been successfully addressed in many places around the world. Second, action is urgent. We can't afford to lose more time. Third, regulations to tackle tropospheric ozone are no regrets policies. And fourth, reducing tropospheric ozone is going to give you 4 wins: a climate win, a public health win, a food security and social win, and all put together, it will also give a large economic win. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Citeli, for your exceptionally concise and insightful presentation of the policy brief. It is now who will bring invaluable perspectives to our discussion on this critical topic. Joining us in person today are Dr. Helen Worden from the National Center for Atmospheric Research and co-chair. She is the co-chair of the International Global Atmospheric Chemistry, the IGAC Tropospheric Ozone Assessment Report, the second one. Also, Dr. Alberto Ayala. He is the Executive Director and Air Pollution Control Officer of the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District in California. And also Dr. Victor Hugo Paramo, the Executive Director, a brilliant scientist in Mexico, of the Mexican Megalopolis Environmental Commission. Their impressive credentials and contributions to this domain can be explored in detail, of course, on our website. We are also honored to include insights from Professor Drew Shindell, chair of the Scientific Advisory Panel to the Climate and Cleaner Coalition of Nations and Organizations. He's in China today, so although he couldn't join us in person, he was kindly shared a video message, which we will present immediately. So Marvin, can you help us with Professor Shindell video, please?
First, I would like to commend Clean Air Fund and Clean Air Task Force for getting together this new work on the need to target tropospheric ozone. And, you know, we don't have the luxury anymore, now that we've waited so long to tackle our emissions, to focus on CO2 alone. We really need to do everything we possibly can, and that means targeting all of the non-CO2 pollutants. And in the case of tropospheric ozone, that means targeting the precursors. There's no other way to both meet our target to keep warming below dangerous levels and to mitigate change in the near term when people are already suffering from heat waves, fires, floods, etc. So bringing tropospheric ozone to the fore is, I think, a valuable step. Tropospheric ozone has a variety of precursors, as we all know, I think. But one thing that's very clear is that virtually any efforts to target methane will yield benefits for climate change. Reducing climate change, that is, because methane is not only a main tropospheric ozone precursor, but is, of course, a greenhouse gas itself. And methane is virtually always emitted alone. When it comes to the other precursors, it's important to consider the co-emissions. As a case like carbon monoxide, a product of incomplete combustion, there's virtually always other emissions coming out from the same sources. And in the case of nitrous oxide, there is not only a variety of potential co-emissions, but nitrous oxide on its own can actually contribute to cooling, so that we need to be careful to consider which efforts to reduce tropospheric ozone precursors to prioritize. And so I'm happy to see in this new report a call for improved understanding of how different control measures would affect both tropospheric ozone in particular and climate change in general. I think it's clear that they will always improve public health, but we really can use for non-methane ozone precursors a better understanding of how to prioritize different measures to control tropospheric ozone. So it's great to have this on our agenda. Push harder for methane, push to better understand other tropospheric ozone precursors, and eventually we can hopefully bring the radiative forcing due to ozone and its contribution to temperature change down, along with so many of the other important greenhouse gases. Thanks.
Okay, so let's turn to our panelists better. I like to pose a question that invites each of them to share their perspectives on the call to action outlined in the policy brief, drawing from their unique expertise and professional experience. Each panelist will have an initial 3-minute intervention. Let me begin with Dr. Helen Worden. And Helen, this is the question. From a scientific perspective, why is it important to consider tropospheric ozone in international climate agreements? In fact, let me expand the question. Which questions does the research on tropospheric ozone would like to answer in the coming years?
Oh, very, very interesting question about why, as far as it being scientifically interesting, as we've talked, it's not created directly from emissions, but it's created from precursor emissions. And so it's a very complicated problem to understand exactly what's causing it. And the urban areas are different from rural areas. And so you have to treat it as a problem that requires measurements in all these
requiere
different
medidas
areas,
en todas
as
estas
well as
áreas, así
chemical models
como
that can
modelos
account
químicos
for all the processes in the atmosphere.
que
And
llevan a la contabilidad de
so
los.
it will always be interesting, but as far as controlling it in urban areas, you can actually get to different chemical regimes. So, like if you reduce your NOx emissions so much, then then you'll go into a different chemical regime where the VOCs, reducing those further doesn't help you. I mean, I'm sorry, reducing NOx further does not help. So it's complicated to do that, and I think. For example, if you say that you've reduced NOx enough, then you do have to start looking at the VOCs. So you have to take enough measurements to know when an urban area is in that situation and make the right policy choices because of that. So I'm probably not saying this very clearly, but so that's one level of policy implementation that you need to monitor and continue to assess so that you know it's working. And then another area is just the background ozone all around the globe. And that's really where you see the climate effects as well, because it's more in the upper troposphere where that has a climate effect. And the sources of that ozone can be quite different than what's at the surface. That's more of the methane, the background methane. So if methane is increasing, then it will increase the background ozone as well. And another big topic that I'm interested in is wildfires. And increasing wildfires are very, we don't model them very well in our models because they have such variability and they depend on so many things in terms of climate change, as far as their increase and what, increases in ignition. We have man-made wildfires versus natural to consider, and whether natural fires are increasing as well. So that's I don't know if I've taken my 3 minutes, but I think understanding all of those things together is important, and that's why you really need this sort of we have the Tropospheric Ozone Assessment Report, which is trying to get the expertise of people all around the world so that we understand what's happening both locally and globally to tropospheric ozone.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Well, now let me turn to Dr. Alberto Ayala, since ozone precursors, as Helen was explaining, are having a complex interrelationship, photochemical reactions, etc. These precursors primarily originate from vehicles, mobile sources. There's no better reference than California, a state at the forefront of tackling this issue, and where, Alberto, you have built your extensive expertise. So how can we control ozone precursors in the transportation sector, which is the fastest growing sector of greenhouse gases?
Yes, thank you, Rodolfo, for the question. And first of all, I want to say congratulations to the Clean Air Institute and the other partners for putting together this report. Is long overdue that we put some focused attention on the co-benefits, as we call them, the opportunities that we all have tackling the climate crisis, by also helping reduce urban air pollution primarily. It is a complex issue, but as you mentioned, every challenge can turn into an opportunity. And here in California, unfortunately, we have the distinction of having some of the worst air pollution in the country, and we have probably the longest history in the country as well, not only suffering from ozone pollution, but also trying to find viable strategies to control it. And as you mentioned, transportation the transportation sector, because it is fueled primarily by fossil fuels, is one of the biggest sources of air and climate pollution, and primarily ozone. So in California, as you all know, the fight against air pollution from vehicles started many decades ago. The first regulations were introduced in the late 70s. And I make reference to history because I think it speaks to the many lessons that we can share with you all in terms of the strategies that have worked, as well as the ones that perhaps you should think about avoiding. But primarily, obviously, technological improvements in the way that engines are designed and operate, very advanced emission control technologies that are applied post combustion. Some of these technologies today are ubiquitous. The three-way catalyst that was something that was tried first in California is now in every, or should be in every vehicle in the world. And the other type of prominent engine, the diesel engine, also has solutions that are technological with advanced controls that can be applied very effectively, very successfully. I think the key for other jurisdictions around the world is to make sure that not only are we applying technology to clean up NOx emissions from transportation when the vehicles and equipment are new, but they need to stay clean throughout the life of that vehicle and equipment. The useful life needs to be something that is paid attention to. And I think those are some of the lessons that we can share with other jurisdictions in emerging economies, and to make sure that no matter how old the vehicle is or the piece of equipment is, that is staying clean and performing well, as when it was new and first introduced into the market. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto. I would like to turn to Dr. Victor Hugo Paramo. He will be speaking in Spanish to discuss what is arguably the most pressing social issue associated with ozone pollution. So what public policies would help most to reduce the impacts on public health in vulnerable populations? Let me translate these questions to Spanish, and you can also switch to the translation. O sea, ¿cuáles son las políticas que nos permiten proteger la salud pública, pues, de los grupos más vulnerables, más lábiles de la sociedad en un área urbana, en una zona metropolitana o inclusive a nivel rural? Víctor Hugo, tú tienes la palabra.
Victor Hugo, you have the mic. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak in Spanish. My English is not very good, to be honest. And thank you so much for the invite and to this excellent event. It's really something that we really needed. And this subject is very relevant and will be even more relevant in years to come. And we see how the climate change and effects more and more is manifesting, and among others is having consequences in the air quality. We've had in previous warm seasons, like we hadn't had since 2016. We've had a lot of ozone events, and that allows us to reconsider what we've done and where we can change in the future. And we also have this other side of, well, what do we do whenever we see these such peak episodes of contamination? What we have to consider, first of all, how do we protect ourselves as human beings and how to protect our health? And this could be through publicly acquired information, clearly transferred with messaging that the population can clearly understand and protect themselves from the high peak concentration. And it's very important to also be able to
medios el por qué se están dando estas situaciones. También, pues hay otros aspectos que también ya tienen que ver con la participación pública en la aplicación de las políticas.
Implementation of policies. We know that in the ozone, in the case of the ozone, a very important element is these products that we consume in our homes, like for instance, substances that we use for cleaning, for personal hygiene, and have ozone precursors that are very important. And when you have a population of 20 million of these emissions, believe you me, are very impacting and can contribute to almost half of the problem. So inform people about this and especially work towards supplanting these products with ones that are more friendly. And it's something that is accompanied by public information so that they can participate better and like there's other like emissions through vehicle and also motorists and making sure that they have their cars in the best of shape so that they're inspected and so that cars will contaminate the least possible. And also policies that will be very important, like in our case, why do we use exorbitant amount of petroleum, liquefied petroleum, which is one of the precursors of ozone. And here are programs like introduction
or
of
the introduction of solar
heaters.
warmers. It's very important, and as long as we're using them, because that'll allow us to consume less gas. Now, all of this needs to be accompanied by, of course, the participation of the population and the constituency. They are the ones that need to perform these activities. So to be able to inform them as best as we can and help them. And of course, the government is one of its most important tasks on how to lead these public tasks. And to protect the population is the primordial thing, right? And that's where I would leave it at. Thank you. Thank you, Victor Hugo.
Well, I have some few questions here. Perhaps these questions are for Helen, because they are asking about the function of tropospheric ozone in the atmosphere and why it is present in the lower layers of our atmosphere. And in light of this call being made at COP29, could you indicate what is the current scenario, the current status regarding tropospheric ozone and its impacts?
Sure. So, well, the reason we have tropospheric ozone, there are some natural sources in the lowest layer. For example, there are plants emit some of the precursors that create tropospheric ozone, and in fact, ozone itself is important for the balance of chemistry in the atmosphere. So there's it's the excess above that natural amount that we're worried about, and that's what also is dangerous to human health and plants. And then in the stratosphere, of course, we have the natural layer, as Zatelli was describing, that protects us from UV radiation, and that's important to preserve as well. But then that also sometimes is a natural source of ozone in the troposphere. It comes down in what are called exchange events between the stratosphere and the troposphere. And all of that, from the surface to the tropopause, so that's where the temperature inverts, that can act as a warming agent. So that's why it's also a greenhouse gas, as well as a pollutant for human health. So when we make more than is naturally there in the troposphere, again, that's when we can have these pollution events, and the weather contributes to that a lot. You can get stagnation cases where you just have like hot air with lots of photons making the chemistry, just trapping it over a city, for example, and those sorts of things, those sorts of extreme events are something we need to start well, not start thinking about. I mean, we obviously are thinking about them, but that's something that we're worried about will occur more often. So I guess to get back to the question, what creates it is like I said at the beginning, a combination of things. There's the local emissions, and then there's the background. And you really have to understand both of those if you want to do any sort of mitigation.
Indeed. Thank you, Helen. I have a question that perhaps Alberto and Victor Hugo can help us in understanding this overlapping situation that we are having to tackle greenhouse gases and air pollutants. Because the question is related with the suggested policies made in this policy brief explained by Citelli to control or minimize tropospheric ozone. Are these policies part of the adaptation or mitigation efforts on NDCs for the moment, for example, in the States or in Mexico?
Thank you, Rodolfo. I'll take a stab at the question. At the moment, they're not included, and I think that's why this event is so important, because we do need to broaden our thinking in terms of thinking of air pollutants, conventional air pollutants for their climate forcing, and vice versa, if that may be the case. So I think there's quite a bit of opportunity in the policy realm to expand our horizon, if you will. And I think the entire category of short-lived climate forcers is a good example of that. I think the case has been made that we need to start thinking more holistically, because the unfortunate reality is our energy paradigm that is almost entirely dependent on fossil fuels is really what is at the root cause of both the climate pollutants that we're trying to address through the COP process, but as well as the more conventional air pollution that we have been discussing. And I say that because we often point to the co-benefit. 9 out of 10 times, if you tackle one, you will benefit the other. And I think that is the opportunity that we want to present to the jurisdictions that are with us today, that many of us have valuable lessons that we can share with others, so they can leapfrog to the solutions that we also know are viable when it comes to reducing the human cost aspect of ozone formation. So that would be my answer at this point.
Thanks, Alberto. And let me return to Helen, because there is a question here that is relevant for the public, because they are asking if it is feasible to have ozone formation at our homes. I mean, is this feasible? No, is dangerous? Is harmful?
Actually, yes. This is not my area of expertise, indoor air quality. I study more of the ambient, or what we call outdoor air quality. But yes, I think there are some ways that you have to be careful using household cleaning products, for example. But that's again, I'd rather not speak outside of my field, but that's a whole new area of study, I would say, to look at how we how what we do inside our homes affects our indoor air quality. And then, of course, you have large sources of air coming from the outside when there's a wildfire, for example, and you should try to close your windows and filter your air. So it's certainly an important issue, the indoor air quality. But I couldn't say exactly what combination of stuff can do that. I mean, certainly cooking can cause particulates in your home, for example. So there are ways to try to keep your air inside clean as well.
And expanding this question, Ellen, how can we control ozone concentrations in non-urban urban areas?
Well, again, that goes back to sort of what plants will produce a lot of ozone. So there are some plants that emit a lot of isoprene, which then can create ozone. So it's something to consider, for example, when you're trying to plant trees to make a green area, in a city or whatever carbon offset you're trying to do by planting trees. You might want to make sure the trees don't make a lot of ozone. There are certain, like oak trees, for example, can produce isoprene. So there's issues like that. But I think that, like I said in the beginning, the main thing is is the fires that are starting to increase. And so, for example, ozone, I think, is certainly on the west coast of the United States has gone down in the last couple decades, but is now probably starting to go up again because of fires, at least in the summer. And so that's a real concern. Areas where we have been able to control the emissions from cities, those emissions are being offset by fires. So I think trying to limit the ignitions that are caused by people for fires is another real way to hopefully control some of those emissions as well.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I suppose that we also have to control the livestock emissions of methane, for example, or from landfills.
Yes. As we've mentioned, the co-benefits of controlling methane are very important because methane is a big precursor, especially for background ozone.
Yeah. Victor Hugo, you have a lot of experience controlling different sources of precursors. Perhaps you can explain us how to do it in a megalopolis like the Mexico City megalopolis, ¿no?
Yes. Sí, quisiera antes, si me permites, decir unas palabras.
Well, first, I'd like to say something first in continuation to what our friend Alberto had mentioned. This of including the topic of ozone and the NDCs is very important. I think it would be a big step to be able to do it, right? Notwithstanding, there is a topic that is very important to mention. The ozone formation is very complex. There are many factors, and this process in reality needs to be sustained on scientific knowledge that should be very solid. It's very important. These factors, including climate, meteorology, atmospheric chemistry, and other forest concepts and the transportation of mass, and all of that varies in time and space. So I believe that one aspect for countries to make this a priority will depend highly on the how certain these actions would be able to be reduced, right? The problems would be able to be reduced. I think it's very important for some countries, for example, us in Mexico, we have, to a certain degree, scientific knowledge, but there are other cities that, for example, Guadalajara and Monterrey don't have it completely. So I think it's a substantial factor that should be considered so that the countries could decide to consider it in the NDS. And I'm sorry, you were mentioning other actions that have been applied, and in the Valley of Mexico, if you remember, this started at the beginning of the 80s and 90s, and so I think it was to, remove very contaminating industries like a refinery we used to have, and to be able to modify the composition of fuels, which used to have this. So it was a big revolution with vehicle technologies that were very modern and which unfortunately we took advantage of, and so it was we evaluated a lot of norms for many processes, and currently all of this in a certain way gave its results with a very significant air quality modification. And so now we're kind of in a standpoint where factors that are disfavorable, but at the same time we need to revise these actions that are in execution, and new actions. Where are these new actions going? Because at this point, it's focusing a lot in the volatile organic components, and so very main to that would be the metropolitan transportation system. There are a lot of cars in circulation. The transportation systems are not very efficient in all of the metropolitan area, and well, that's what it's being worked on. The objectives go towards electrification. So we believe that once that is achieved, we will have a sort of advancement in this.
Perhaps we can return to Citeli because there are questions about the decisions at COP29. So, Citeli, given your active involvement in Baku during climate negotiations, there's a strategic question that is important to delve into. What decisions should COP29 take to ensure that this problem is considered in the NDCs and in the Paris Agreement agenda? Will it be possible to incorporate the issue of superpollutants in the COP30 stock take in Belém, Brazil? What is your opinion about that?
I think it's I think there is some momentum right now for sure, especially in superpollutants. There had been these COP specifically. There had been important conversations and negotiations being made into including superpollutants that consider tropospheric ozone into them, and so we hope the negotiators will find a middle ground and a good way to make this to make tropospheric ozone into the final COP texts. We really expect that there is some finance also coming into tackling superpollutants. This COP has been known especially for the finance part. So I think that is one of the main expectations that we are hoping to have after this COP.
Yeah. There are other questions. Alberto, there is a question regarding this policy of promoting alcohol, biogasoline, to move cars as an alternative fuel in a circular economy approach. No, is this beneficial or is this causing more VOCs that can, of course, produce ozone? What is your experience in California with biofuels, for example?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rodolfo. That's an excellent question, and I think it's the one example that I point to when I made reference to 9 out of 10 times, if you reduce climate pollution, you also get air pollution. There are some cases, as the question noted, that may not necessarily hold, but I think fundamentally, biofuels obviously are part of are a key strategy in the climate agenda in California, because obviously the energy transition is going away from fossil fuels is going to be very difficult. Let's be clear about that. It is difficult in rich countries, and it will be difficult in emerging economies. And I think that's why we need biofuels to begin that transition and to provide an alternative to fossil-based energy, particularly in the sources, the sectors that are the biggest sources, like the transportation sources. But getting back to some of the earlier questions, I think the challenge with biofuels is that they are still meant to be used in primarily an internal combustion engine. And the best way to think about how to mitigate ozone, for that matter, is anytime you have combustion, there's likely going to be formation of precursors for ozone and other type of pollutants like particles, for example. So that is really the downside of the biofuel story, the fact that they give you a very good, very viable climate strategy in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of the use of fuels. But again, if we continue to rely on combusting those fuels to get energy out, we're always going to be mindful and have the issue of ozone and particle pollution and some of the other pollutants. So it's a balancing act. I think that's the best way to think about this. It's a bridge as we march down the path towards electrification of transportation, certainly electrification of the built environment.
And also there is another question, perhaps the experience in Mexico City and LA can give some light about the technical complexities of controlling precursors that are not coming from combustion processes, like evaporative emissions from coating activities, for example, or perhaps emissions that are coming from activities that are services, in fact, like environmental services, like the forest, etc. So selecting the right trees could be also a complex decision if we take care about tropospheric ozone. Helen explained a little bit about that, but what can you say about it, Alberto or Victor Hugo?
Certainly, and I think I can point to one of the recommendations that Citeli spoke about. And again, one of the lessons that we can offer from the California experience is you have to have a very robust, very comprehensive regulatory structure. You have to have all the tools, scientific and otherwise. You have to have the measurement and the inventories. Because I think what you're speaking to, Rodolfo, is precisely the sources of these precursors are very diverse, and every source need to have its own regulatory framing. But it's possible, right? I mean, the approach that we have taken in California is looking at consumer products, which are definitely sources, is looking at transportation, is looking at industrial sources. We've talked about biogenic emissions, and it's absolutely something. So you need a coordinated and an integrated approach, where underpinning that you have a very strong regulatory framework, and you have the science and the inventories informing you where the emissions are coming from, and most importantly, what are the opportunities and how do you get to emission reductions? And I think putting that in place with a strong, obviously, compliance and enforcement, right? So we can't just set the standards and forget about it. You really have to track progress. And I think that's the spirit of the NDCs and some of the other commitments that countries are making.
Victor,
Yo podría agregar un tema que es particular aquí a la zona
What I could
metropolitana
add
y
is
es
what's specific to the
el hecho de que
metropolitan
tenemos
area here
muchos
is the fact that we
pequeñitos
have
comercios,
a lot of teeny tiny
puestos de
commerce
tacos, de
businesses like
tamales,
tacos and tamale
y
stands um,
pintura en la
and
calle. O
painting in
sea,
the streets.
eso también
And that is also
pues es muy sensible socialmente y nos
socially
obliga
things
a
that are very
tener
sensitive, and
un
it
enfoque
forces us into having
en
to
donde
have
aparte
a
de
focus
tener
that
en mente pues este
other,
control
but
necesitamos
aside from
pensar
having to have
en la
these
situación de las
controls,
personas, ¿no?
we have to
Entonces
think
ahí el
about
gobierno
people's
debe
lives.
de
And
crear
so
las
this is where the
condiciones
government has to
para
create
que si
certain
esas
conditions
actividades no
where if
son
those
adecuadas, pues
activities are
haya
not
una
appropriate,
transición, un
that there
cambio,
could be a
pero pensando
transition, a
también de qué
shift, but
manera
also keeping
cuidas
in mind
el bienestar de
how
las
do
personas.
you make
Es algo
sure that you
difícil
take care of the
pero
well-being of
bueno, como dice Alberto,
people.
creo que
That's
siempre
hard and it's
hay
difficult, but like
soluciones.
Alberto is saying,
El
there's
otro
always
tema
solutions.
que
The other
nosotros
thing
hemos
that
identificado
we have
y
identified
por
as a
eso
problem,
es uno de los motivos que
and it's one of the
superiora
reasons
la
why
Comisión
the
Ambiental de la
commission
Megalópolis,
of
es que
Megalopolis has been
en la
put in
región hay
place
mucho
because in
intercambio
the
de
region there's
masas de
just a lot of
aire de los
exchange of
valles.
air
Entonces,
masses from the
se
valleys. And
ha
so
identificado que si no
we
hay
have
una
identified that if
acción
we don't
conjunta,
have
el hecho de que la
an
zona
action
metropolitana del Valle de México
in the
tenga ese
Valley of
programa no va a
Mexico
ser
have its own
suficiente como
programs,
para
it's not going
llegar
to
a
be
los
enough
resultados que
unless we have a
requerimos.
joint
Necesitamos un
action with the
enfoque
other areas.
nacional
So we
y
have to
bueno,
have
creo que
the
eso se
localized
puede
and also
extender
the
a
regional
otras
actions, and
situaciones
that can be
del país y
applied
quizás
to other
del planeta.
situations
Sí.
in the country as well.
Okay, but Helen raised the hand. Helen, can you take the floor, please?
Sure. I just thought I'd mention, I think one of the things that Professor Schindel was going to say is really the urgency here for the doing something that has co-benefits like reducing all of the short-lived climate forcers, but ozone in particular is that as we know, reductions to CO2 will certainly have benefits over the longer term climate era, but reducing short-lived climate forcers is more urgent because they can have a more immediate impact as well. So I just wanted to make that point that there's all these co-benefits of it. There's the human health, the vegetation health, but also just the fact that because they are short-lived, they can make a difference in the short term.
Yes, that's true. Well, after this enlightening dialogue on superpollutants, particularly tropospheric ozone and its precursors, I would like to conclude with several key reflections that are critical as we approach the decisions to be made at COP29. Our ability to prevent the further tipping points and mitigate the increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters linked to climate change hinges on effectively addressing short-lived climate pollutants. These pollutants represent a significant opportunity for impactful action. And as Helen was explaining, we have a lot of co-benefits tackling ozone problems. And we already have robust programs, standards, and a range of national and international mechanisms designed to control them, as Victor Hugo and Alberto explained. Despite this, the issue of superpollutants remains conspicuously absent from the climate negotiation agenda. It is imperative that this gap be addressed urgently. I trust that our negotiators will approach these considerations with sensitivity and open mind, because integrating these problems are vital as a policy proposals into their final decisions at COP29. The stakes are high, and incorporating this dimension could mark a fundamental step in our collective climate efforts. I'm pleased to announce that the advisory panel for this initiative on tropospheric ozone will convene in an open forum, this virtual pavilion on Thursday, the 21st, to discuss the potential outcomes of COP29 on superpollutants. The announcement will soon be able in the pavilion's scheduled section, so please be aware about that. To conclude, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Citeli, to our distinguished panelists, to our multi-organization team that is backing us all the time, and to all of you for contributing to this enriching and thought-provoking discussion. It has truly been a privilege to engage in such a meaningful dialogue. Now I'm pleased to pass the floor to Juliana Clackham. She is the CEO of the Clean Air Institute, who will share some important updates and deliver her closing remarks to bring this event to a fitting conclusion. Juliana, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. So I wanted to mention that today's event has emphasized the urgent need for coordinated global action to address tropospheric ozone and its precursors, from exploring strategies for the transport sector and other key sectors to envisioning its incorporation into
envisionar la incorporación a la toma del stock. Así que me gustaría ahora especialmente darle un agradecimiento a los panelistas, la doctora Ellen Gulen, el doctor Bill Shingle, quien va a estar presentando después de mí, y el doctor Víctor Hugo Páramo y el doctor Alberto Ayala por compartir sus soluciones valiosas. También me gustaría extender nuestra apreciación a ti, Rodolfo, doctor Rodolfo Lagic, por esta sección, y el doctor Citeli Sopa por su presentación increíble de
express our gratitude to the Clean Air Fund for supporting this important initiative, and to our dedicated colleagues from the CATF, Hill Consulting, and the Clean Air Institute, whose hard work made the policy brief a reality. So as we move forward, we are preparing a comprehensive report that will provide the details of the analysis presented in the policy brief, which we look forward to sharing with all of you soon. And also, we are developing a strategic global short-term plan, a blueprint to advance action on tropospheric ozone from 2025 to 2028. So finally, we hope this discussion inspires all of you to continue advocating for the inclusion of tropospheric ozone as a superpollutant in global agendas, driving ambitious policies and fostering innovative solutions. So thank you all for your participation and for being part of this vital conversation. We will stay in touch, and thank you once again, and wishing everyone a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your participation today. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you all.